All right, everyone, we're gonna go ahead and get started. Normally I like to play DJ for a little bit longer, but we have such an incredible panel here. I can't wait. So we're gonna go ahead and dive right in. For those who know me and those who do not, my name is Desiree Stoller, and I am the Senior Director of Alumni Engagement at MLT. And as you can see here, we have the A team when it comes to the type of leaders that you would want to be in the room with to help advise you on your pursuits as it relates to for-profit board seats. The reason why we decided to hold this session, and you know that we think very carefully about where we ask for your time, is because for almost 20 years, MLT has focused on three things: the playbook, the network, and the coaching. And that was to help from early career all the way to your pursuits as a senior executive. And the past year, we have taken a very proactive stance towards providing a new suite of support for those of you who are at the senior levels and now need a new set of tools for what this new horizon may bring. So I'm going to briefly introduce Esther in a second, but just to give you a sense, this panel, which is really going to push themselves to help you on all different angles, but we're going to try to help you understand why we're here, why we're meeting the moment, and what this could mean for you. What are the trends, the hurdles, the breakthroughs that will make that an easier and also existingly a difficult lift for you. And because we care about the playbook, what is that roadmap? And what is that roadmap 1 year, 3 year, 5 year, 5+ years out? Because let's just be honest, all of you may be at different points in your career, and we want to support you wherever that may be. Last quick thing I'll say before introducing Esther is that if we're being honest, some of you cannot be on corporate boards. And originally when we positioned this, it was all about joining a corporate board. But I want you to know that we will be speaking broadly to any for-profit board seats, because ultimately that is the place where I want you to play. I want you to pursue things that are going to give you the influence and the impact, and yes, the compensation to that meet you at this level. So without further ado, and of course, someone's mowing right at the moment that I'm doing a presentation, but hashtag pandemic life, that's what's going on. Esther, who I am just honored to have today, is just a powerhouse. And as someone who has worked with CHCI, which some of you may know, Congressional Hispanic Caucus Institute, she was on my radar years and years ago, but for the past 5+ years has been the president and CEO of the Latino Corporate Directors Association. And it is exactly what it says. They're there to make sure that executives are ready to pursue, land, and thrive on boards. And they have had tremendous growth over the past 5 years. And you'll see that the rest of the panel who you're about to hear from basically covers every single angle and facet of what you may want to consider as you're preparing to join a board. So without further ado, I'm going to let Esther take it over, but I'll be in the background. Send me private notes as you need it, and we'll make sure you're supported. Thank you, Esther.
Thank you, Desiree. Desiree, it's my pleasure to be with you and the MLT, you call them MLTers here, leaders in all aspects of private industry. I am pleased to moderate today's session, Path to Your First Corporate Board Seat, the 3 to 5 year plan. To get us started, let me tell you a little bit about the landscape and where we are today. Over the last decade, the playing field was flat, with no increase in the representation of Black and Brown people in the boardroom. Today, we are at an inflection point. There's finally a momentum and push to build corporate boardrooms that better reflect the customers and employees. And the push is because diversity is good for business and good for corporate governance. This push has been driven by institutional investors and large pension funds who point to the fact that companies perform better and are better governed when there is a mix of diverse skill sets and backgrounds at the table. All white boards no longer apply. It is, it begun with a focus on women on public company boards. And today, we are now also seeing the push for board diversity on public and private companies. And that also is limited partners of private equity are getting involved, as well as investors of venture capital firms. So what we have today for you is very unique. First, there's another thing that's different today is that there's a larger array of organizations and firms that are supporting board candidates and supporting the effort to diversify the corporate landscape. So you're in for a treat because MLT has assembled the leading firms that are making a difference, each with a unique asset to support companies on their journey to diversify their boardrooms and to help them tap diverse talent. My organization, the Latino Corporate Directors Association, we've grown the largest network of Latino corporate directors and aspiring directors to build a supply. We have a Board Ready Institute that is a deep dive that prepares and positions Latinos for the boardroom. I'm a co-founder of the Diverse Corporate Directors Coalition, and this is a coalition that brings together Black Corporate Directors Conference, Asian corporate directors, women corporate directors, LGBTQ, as well as, of course, Latino corporate directors. So we work also in coalition. So with that as our backdrop, let's welcome our panel. I'm going to start with Lisa. Lisa Edwards is president and CEO of Diligent Corporation and serves on the board of Colgate-Palmolive. You have these bios, but I'm going to give you just a little bit more info on each of them as I introduce them. In her previous role, Lisa was EVP at Salesforce, leading the strategic business operations, partner, and customer engagement. Next, we have Stephen Brown, a senior advisor at KPMG's Board Leadership Center. Formerly, he was CEO of the Society of Corporate Governance and led the corporate governance group at TIAA Nuveen. Matt Bloomberg is the founder and CEO of Bolster. Matt was previously chairman and CEO of ReturnPath, the market leader in email optimization. He was in that role until it was sold to Validity. And we have David Chun, who is founder and CEO of Equilar. In his previous role, David was vice president in the investment banking division of Donaldson, Lufkin, and Jenrit. I can go on and on about their amazing accomplishments. I wanted to give you a little teaser on them, but we're going to get started by first learning a little bit more about their organizations and how their organizations are building on the urgency and the opportunity of this moment for board diversity. Let's get started with Matt. Matt Bloomberg and Bolster. Tell us about Bolster.
Absolutely. Well, thanks, Esther. And thanks to Desiree and everyone at MLT for putting on this great event. We're happy to be here. Bolster is a company that I started last year, right at the beginning of the pandemic, which is either great timing or terrible timing, along with a group of colleagues from my prior company. We are a marketplace for on-demand executive talent. So what that means is we're an online marketplace. We work just like Airbnb, and we match CEOs, typically of private venture-backed companies, but we do have a handful of public company clients as well. We match the CEOs of those companies with talented and experienced senior executives for several different types of jobs. for fractional or interim executive roles or freelance executive roles, for coach or mentor roles, or for independent board of director roles. So we do a lot of board placement work, typically in the private venture-backed world, but increasingly in the public world as well. We're a marketplace. Both sides of it are free to join. One side is client, which would be a CEO. One side is member, which would be an executive. We are still a relatively young company, as I mentioned, but we just this week are going to be making our 100th placement since we opened for business really in October of last year. So we're getting a lot of good traction. And, as I said, we really represent the sort of VC tech private company ecosystem. And we are really all about broadening access to those opportunities. And the opportunity to be on a board or to be an advisor of a small private tech startup, as I think everyone knows, could turn into nothing someday, or it could turn out to be the next Google, and you never quite know when you start with one of those things. But they're very fast-paced and interesting companies to participate in. We're very focused on expanding the pool of available directors and doing a lot of work to evangelize in the VC and tech world that board ready does not necessarily mean you have been on a board. And that's a really important distinction that I think we'll talk about later today on the panel. So we work pretty hard to build a diverse network here. Today, our member population is just about 5,000 executives. The total population is 35% non-white and 47% female. But if you look at actually our most recent 1,000 members, so you look at sort of how we're recruiting today, we're actually running at 53% female and 45% non-white. So we're very proud of those numbers. We're working very hard to bring talented executives of all types into our network.
Congratulations, Matt. Let's hear from Lisa and Diligent.
Sure. Thanks, Esther. So Diligent is the largest SaaS GRC, so governance, risk, and compliance platform in the world. And on the governance side, which is sort of what we're talking about today, we have the world's largest board portal. So we have over 700,000 board members that log onto our product on a quarterly basis to do their board meetings in over 130 countries at 25,000 customers around the world. So, so we have, looked really deeply at how can we make an impact and what is our role, because we do have access to this amazing network and community. And so last summer we spun up the Diligent Network for rising directors, and specifically what we did was say every director on our platform, because they already have board expertise and because they know what qualified looks like, can nominate 2 rising directors. And we encourage them to make those women and people of color and underrepresented minorities. And so we have today a really robust platform for rising directors. And then we made it a bit of a marketplace where we have over 150 listings for board members. So when companies need a new director, or they may be ready to IPO and thinking about their first independent, they can bring that, come to the network and look for qualified directors. The other thing that I think is really important, and we'll get into more, I'm sure, later in the conversation, is just getting yourself educated on trends in the boardroom. So I'll throw a link in the chat on the Diligent Institute, but we do have a number of free resources through our research arm that can really start to get people educated about what's going on in the boardroom, what's important, what's not important, and how to start positioning yourself to talk to those issues. So so that's kind of what we're up to at Diligent. It's a really exciting time, I think. ESG is certainly at the forefront of what a lot of companies are looking at, and as we look at trends in the boardroom, which I'll talk to you later as well, we certainly see those things bubbling up to the boardroom in a more meaningful way than ever before. So I think it's really a great time to be an aspiring director and be thinking about those next steps.
I agree, Lisa. Thank you. David Chun and Equilar.
Great. Thanks, Esther. Thanks, Desiree, and the MLT team for bringing us all together. So appreciate the opportunity. For those who aren't familiar with Equilar, we track data and trends around corporate leadership. So we're just over 20 years old. You'll often see our name cited in places like the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, around compensation, but over the last several years, more so around corporate leader, around board diversity. And, a phrase that Esther and I love to say, you manage what you measure. And so we, several years ago, launched the Gender Diversity Index, and we've been tracking diversity on the gender composition of boards. KPMG, Stephen and his colleagues are a sponsor of that, so appreciate that support. But in addition to corporate governance data that we do track, specifically around diversity, and I'll put this in the chat later, we launched the Equilar Diversity Network about 4 years ago, and Latino Corporate Directors Association, ELC, Ascend Pinnacle, they're all, and up to just shy of 50 different organizations are part of that. And we built an online platform. So think of this as a high-end LinkedIn that makes it very easy. So it's, as people know on this call, it is not a supply issue. And we wanted to break down all the barriers to make it literally a mouse click away for people to be able to source diverse candidates. And so one of the initiatives we had earlier this year is we partnered with Agenda magazine. And so for those who aren't familiar with Agenda, it's a publication that board members read. It's published by the Financial Times, and we identified the 100 most qualified diverse candidates. And Esther, congratulations, you were on that list. And so it was a lot of fun to pull this together, but that's what we're all about, is making it really easy for our clients to be able to source talent and help on that front. And the last point I want to make is, many of you have, I'm sure, have seen NASDAQ's proposed ruling with the SEC. The latest, I believe it's still August 8th is the date we should be keeping our eyes on, where the SEC will formally vote on this, unless it gets pushed out again. But needless to say, there's been a tremendous amount of focus around board composition, and we're NASDAQ's partner on that. And once that gets announced or it gets approved, we'll see quite a bit of activity out in the press. So thanks again.
Well, thank you. And to David's point, data is important and transparency is important, and companies right now are not required to disclose. So David and Equilar do a great job in helping to working with us all to identify the demographics in the boardroom. Stephen Brown and the KPMG Board Leadership Center.
Thank you. And I appreciate hearing from all my panelist colleagues. Some who I met today, others who I've known for hundreds of years, David and Esther. But you don't look a day over 30. My organization at the KPMG Board Leadership Center, I spend my time speaking with boards in the C-suite around bespoke corporate governance matters, which can include the composition of the board and providing advice and insight. And I will, so let me use this time, the next 60 seconds, to say how important it is that we support MLT in doing what it's doing today. Again, it is part of that playbook of network coaching and understanding the playbook. I always remind, I have a young nephew who's about to go to college, that even when you watch professional sports, if you watch a baseball game, there are 25 men on the team, but there are 10 other people sitting in that dugout. And who are they? They are coaches who are coaching multi-million-dollar professionals who still need coaching. Giving that advice of to go right or to go left, or to make this tweak or tweak not. Same thing here. This is about, at this stage of your career, understanding those tweaks that you need to make to get to, if you want to that next level. And by the way, that next level, it's talking about the issue around the supply, and David hit on it. It's not necessarily that it's not a supply issue when we talk about diverse board members. And I'm going to talk a little bit about the process It's about getting into that network so you were considered. And it's a tough job. It's a tough position to get because there are not that many. And it's not that many because not many turnover. And there's not many board seats turnover that are open because it is a darn good job to have. So people do not relinquish them. As a matter of fact, most boards, many boards, will have a age limit, 72, 75. And we've seen over the last 5 years, and David, I know you've seen it in your data, boards are pushing that up. And they're pushing it up because, by the way, boards are self-perpetuating. So the people pushing it up, it's not regulators, it's the boards themselves, because they're darn good jobs. And any resource which is a darn good thing to have becomes very selective and very hard to get because of just that nature of it. They're darn good jobs to have. So this discussion today hopefully will help demystify some of these things and sort of explain sort of the playbook that you need to have. And even when you have that playbook, it's still going to be a darn good job. I mean, it's a darn good, it's tough to get. But if you understand what the network is and you understand the playbook, you have a much better shot at that than someone who doesn't.
Yeah. Can I jump in at something on Stephen's point?
Yes.
So if you look at the U.S. public companies, there's roughly about 3,000 to 4,000. So I'm just going to focus on the Russell 3000. And average board tenure, right, Stephen, you guys publish this all the time, right? It's about 10 years. And if you got roughly 10 board members, you got 1 seat opening up on average per board per year. It's actually slightly less than, I think it's 0.8. And so if you think about this, every year there's only, it may sound like a large number, but 3,000 is not that many public board seats that open up each year. When you think about the number of people, let's face it, somewhat competing for those seats, it's a hard position to get.
And if I could build on that for a second, if you look at the private company universe, the news is both better and worse at the same time. Way more companies, way fewer board seats. So, private companies that have real boards that you would consider to be, sort of training ground for public company boards, they're probably, call it 25,000 of those companies. But not only are the boards a lot smaller, but there are very, very few independent directors on them. Most of the board seats are taken up by founders and VCs. A lot of our research, and I'll talk more about our research in a little bit, would indicate that a generous number is that on average, each of those boards has 0.5 of an independent director, which is the main opportunity to add diversity to those boards. And the tenure of those boards tends to run very long as well. So in that universe of 25,000 companies, my guess is you're talking about 2,000 seats that come up every year, 2,500 seats, 3,000, something like that. So it's even less than the public side, despite the large number of board seats. So the opportunity to really move the needle is actually in getting those boards to add more independent directors first, and then figure out how to fill those seats in a in a more open and diverse way.
That's right. And clearly there's somewhat differences between serving on a public company board and a private company board, but both, we'll be hearing more about that. But continuing on this theme of trends and breakthroughs that you are seeing, Lisa, you're in the boardroom. Tell us what the conversation is like in terms of, not only advancing board diversity, but ESG and let's say diversity across the workforce. What is the conversation? What are you seeing? What are you hearing?
Sure. So we do surveys on this, as well as I can talk to my own experience on the Colgate board, where we see ESG becoming much more mainstream. We do. So I have a COVID puppy behind me who's trying to add her part to the conversation. So we do see that many companies are actually tying ESG type metrics, and that might be diversity or sustainability or other governance issues, and they are tying those to executive compensation. And from a very sort of tactical perspective, when those things get tied to executive compensation, to the earlier comment on, what is measured happens, we do see that happening a lot. I will say from personal experience, ESG is all over my boardroom. And in addition, I think there's a lot of conversation right now about the SEC talking about sustainability becoming much more mainstream. So many people believe that TCFD, which is one of the sustainability standards, is going to become SEC recommended and or mandated in the coming years. And when that happens, and then obviously every company has to start thinking about this in a more holistic and serious way. So I think it is a real thing. And statistically, we look at who is entering the boardroom. And what we've seen is that the traditional roles of CEO, CFO, and COO have been declining. Now, this is not falling off a cliff. That is still the preferred, sort of go-to, like, let's get ourselves a sitting CFO to sit on or a recently retired CFO to sit on the audit committee. But in general, what we're seeing is an increase in kind of two areas. One is just cyber. So if you happen to be on the call and have a cyber background, congratulations, you're in very hot demand. With the trend toward ransomware and cybersecurity, that's very much entered the boardroom as a really almost every meeting conversation, whether that is what are we doing to ensure that we are safe, or how are we thinking about a go forward as it relates to our strategy around digital transformation, particularly accelerated by the pandemic. The other place that is becoming more valuable, and this is the place where it's disproportionately women are leading the trend on this expertise, is in the area of HR. So as people management and as human capital management became, again, a quarterly, monthly, or even sometimes weekly early in the pandemic discussion, it was important to have that HR voice. And that is something that we see as likely to be continued going forward. And then the third is ESG. So people with real expertise in particularly environmental areas that can bring that expertise into the boardroom. Those are the places where we're really seeing the trend be toward looking for those kinds of resources and actively seeking them out.
Thanks. And let's also pick up, Matt, on your thread. What are you seeing with private companies? And did you want to share your slides?
I can certainly share those slides. I mean, those are sort of largely about diversity in the boardroom of private companies. So why don't we do that?
Yes.
So as I'm pulling up a couple of slides to share here, Bolster did a survey of several hundred of our clients, again, for private venture-backed clients, around a lot of things related to their board: the size of the board, the composition of the board, compensation of board members. And we thought it would be interesting to share a couple of slides here about diversity in particular. So the first one is that more than half of boards have no diversity at all. And most of them, when you think about gender and race and ethnicity, that do have some diversity, have very little. So the sort of purple bar is boards that are completely male or completely white, and then even the turquoise ones are sort of one non-white member, one female member, and you can see the numbers are fairly stark on those fronts. And at the end of the day, that means 8 in 10 board directors of private venture-backed companies are white. And with that, most of that diversity is actually coming from founders. So, we think over time, most of that is going to come from independent directors as that number goes up. But a lot of that is coming from founders. And I would say, honestly, for the most part, those are Indian or Asian founders. There are obviously some Black founders and some Latinx founders, but disproportionately few of them relative to the population. Yeah, here's the numbers. If you look at sort of our survey of a few hundred companies and sort of U.S. general population, the private ecosystem is just generally lagging behind. It's interesting because that's a pretty progressive part of the universe. But I do think it comes back to that challenge that most of the board members are VCs, private equity people, and founders.
And
finally, oh, sorry, yeah.
no, go ahead. Last
No,
one.
I think this is just the last slide, which we also thought was interesting, particularly for this group, is kind of the age breakdown of board directors. It is a pretty nice bell curve. As you'd expect, a lot of board members are a little bit more advanced in their career. But I think if you looked at this relative to public company board members, you would find that the share of directors that are in their 30s is significantly higher here than with public. That may even be true in the 40s, but certainly in their 30s.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and this does look different than public companies, which tend to be, older, in the 60s plus. So this is very helpful and interesting. And for Stephen and Lisa and David, so we've got public companies and investors and shareholders kind of applying some pressure there. On the private company side, are you seeing both for VC and private equity, the limited partners, who is pushing that? Because, we started the conversation 5 years ago about having more independent directors on VC-backed companies. And now, based on Matt's research, we're starting to see this little trend. So what do you think is behind that push?
Well, at the end of the day, right, the VC and the private equity firms, they have limited partners, and the limited partners in many situations will be state pension funds and other large pools of capital like that. And using, let's say, CalPERS and CalSTRS as an example, and you can go to their, we can even just Google this right now, say CalPERS Limited Partners, and it's all on their website, like where do they make their investments, and it'll be all these major private equity firms and whatnot. And if you think about the pension funds, well, who do they represent, right? They represent the workers who they're trying to serve. And if you look at their worker base, right, it's a very diverse group. And so that's why you'll hear about CalPERS and CalSTRS and other funds like that. And what you're seeing, for example, at Carlyle, Cara Helander, her title is, she is the head of DE&I for Carlyle. So she is very much, her job is 100% responsibility, making sure there's diversity throughout their ecosystem. And there's a very good report you can find on their website, I'm sure it's still there, where they looked at by individual portfolio companies, so well over, 250 companies or so, and they looked at ones that were diverse, the more diverse companies versus the ones that were less diverse in their corporate leadership and their board, and they were able to show that, hey, the more diverse teams had better returns. And so, that diversity, just by, it brings, you have cognitive diversity, you have visible diversity, so you have a whole host of issues around diversity. But the bottom line is, Carlyle was able to show that, hey, this is what our LPs want. The results demonstrate that. Sorry, I've got to get the motion sensors going here. But yeah, that's at the end of the day what's happening in terms of the ecosystem.
With private, 2 points here. One, with PE firms and VC firms, the larger they are, it tends to correlate to the deeper interests and deeper resources that they have in looking at those numbers that David put together. But at the end of the day, when we look at in a 10-year time frame in sort of the private markets are extraordinarily robust in America, across the globe. It used to be you had to do an IPO to take your money out. Not the case. You can just sell to another PE firm who will sell to another secondary PE firm. There's lots of money in the private markets, and that also goes to the fact that funding is very robust. Therefore, that's not necessarily a competitive advantage for a private equity firm. Ideas was a competitive advantage, but everyone, you can find a lot of folks with ideas. Really, the competitive advantage is the talent that you put in the boardroom of a PE portfolio company, or that you put into the C-suite of the PE portfolio company. And what all of these firms, the larger firms, have noticed is that we got to make sure that our talent Rolodex is as robust as it should be. And they noticed that, you know, they looked around the room and said, we have pretty wide Rolodexes, but they're not as robust as they should be from Latinos, African Americans, and Asians. Let's fix that from the standpoint of they compete on talent, right? You know, for their business. They don't compete on funding or the access to capital or even ideas. It's on talent, and so that's the movement here. But if I could just go back to both private and public, and here's where these new norms sort of meet current processes. There's regulation and there's pressure from investors, but at the end of the day, and this is not going to change anytime soon, the way that boards replicate themselves is that they literally replicate themselves. And it comes from either their own Rolodexes inside the boardroom, or they borrow it, if the larger companies will borrow it from a search firm, which they pay a significant amount of fees, or they have some other third party that they use. And David and Matt are talking about programs that they offer that help folks inside not go necessarily to a search firm, but increase their Rolodexes by using their products. That said, the process is still boards make their own decision, right? And this, I think, in terms of a playbook, is about how do you get into that circle? Because even if you had a law, you won't have it in the United States, but even if you had a law that said that you had to have a diverse board, and you need to have this many people. We have some rules around that. NASDAQ is trying to push that, but they'll be limited. But even if they had that, boards are going to use their own Rolodexes to get that diversity, right? So it is about, you know, being in that circle. And there's a lot of strategies about how do you use what you know to enlarge that circle of who you know. Because boards replicate from their own Rolodexes, and it's very important to be in that circle. So part of this playbook is how do you get into their Rolodex or their circles? And there are lots of different ways that I think that in the next 30 minutes we'll go through. And if not, we'll go through it in another session that Desiree puts together. But that's that. At the end of the day, that's it. Boards do. I mean, they make these decisions, and they're self. They replicate themselves and have that perspective because it's a perspective of trust. This is not a school board, as we talked about. Matt's wife is on a school board. I served on a school board, or even Congress, where you get elected and you sit next to someone who you may not like, but he got elected from another part of the country. These are consensus-driven institutions. So in a consensus-driven institution, where pretty much they want everyone to agree, they don't pick folks who they don't have an enormous amount of trust. And they get that, who do you trust the most? You trust yourself. So they tend to replicate themselves. And at the second most, they'll look at their colleagues who are already on the board and trust whoever they recommend. So it's a very tight network, and it's about trust and getting into that, to use Robert De Niro's phrase, that circle of trust.
And I'd love to chip in here. I think there's certainly truth to that. And that for me is why diversity begets diversity. I always tell women who are on boards, because there is this very, very strange chicken and egg thing. I gave myself 3 years to find a public board, and I took myself well out of my comfort zone. I'm a tiny bit of a situational extrovert, but really, like, my core is introverted. So I had to do a lot of networking, and I had to do a lot of reach out and attend a lot of things like this. And I tell people, but then once you get a board, you get calls like the next day. Well, I see you're on a board. Do you have capacity for another board? And it's sort of like, well, I was just as qualified 48 hours ago. And yet now all of a sudden I have some sort of imaginary sense of approval and I can be on any board. So I do think it's hard to get the first board. It is not as hard to get the second board. That's definitely that's number one. Number two, I tell women because I don't have current capacity right now. I'm thinking about a second one, maybe a year in the future. But I do get calls all the time. And so, I had a very wise female board member tell me one time, God gave you two arms. One is to pull yourself forward. The other is to reach back and pull people up with you. And so I try to say, I don't currently have capacity, but here are three women that I know that might fit your characteristics. And I really encourage everyone to do that, whether it's for a job or for a panel or for a board of directors. And so, but I do think it is, I think it's, so I agree with you that it's network driven, but I think the more women and people of color that you get on boards, the more that those networks expand. And that gets to the second, piece of this is, we're talking about how do you secure that first board and what is that timeline? And I would say, give yourself time, but then also think about what are the things that are going to qualify me. One is, as you say, Stephen, it's who do I know? And I can't tell you how many phone calls I got where, a headhunter would call me and the very first question they asked me was, who else do you know on the board? And I said, I don't know anyone on the board. And so, but I might know someone who knows someone on the board. So I started sort of thinking about that and thinking about who do I know that could do that? I also talked to my own board of directors. So when I was at Salesforce, I talked to the board members about wanting to take a board seat. And by the way, I wasn't even allowed to at that point, but I said, this is a career goal for me and it's something that I'm very interested in. And I think that's something that everyone can do is once you get to a certain point in leadership, it is to, you are in front of your board occasionally. So I was able to say to recruiters, no, I actually don't have a current board seat, that chicken and egg thing again, but I'm in the boardroom all the time. I present to the board almost quarterly. I know the board. The board will give me references. And so I think that's part of it. The other is cultivate your references. So, you should have at least two CEOs, maybe, a CFO who will vouch for you and say, this is a credible person who knows sort of how to do nose in, hands out in the boardroom, who can ask the right questions, who is both an operator, but knows how to be strategic. There's all these sort of little things that you can pick up along the way. So if you have the references and you work on the network and you understand what the work of a board is, and there's ways to do that. So, I put the link to Diligent Institute in there. The NACD has a bunch of courses. There's places to go to get yourself educated on what is governance, what do boards actually do, and how would what you do create value. And that's, I guess, my last little tidbit of unsolicited advice is start thinking about your board bio. And your board bio is very, very different from a resume. It is not a list of every single thing you've done and what school you went to and with bracketed by years. It's really thinking about how do you succinctly talk about your capabilities and your accomplishments and how you would add value to a board. So that's sort of the kind of the behind the scenes, if you will. The other thing I would say is, if you get a call to talk to a board and you do not get the board, do not feel bad. It's as Stephen said, there's, I think it was Stephen, maybe it was Matt. They don't come up every day. And just getting your name into the mix as someone who was credible but not right this time is a good thing. And it's 8 or 10 or 15 more people who your name is known to. So I think it's always a good thing to get the call. It's always a good thing to get the short list. And if you don't get that board, you can actually, if it's a recruiter, have an honest conversation about why not. And sometimes it might be very tactical reasons. So if you look across the board has a series of qualifications. They may have financial expertise. They may have digital transformation expertise or cyber, increasingly, as I said earlier. They may have something else that they bring to the board. They may have CEO experience and can be that mentor to the CEO. So, look at where you fit. What of those things do I have? Could I sit on an audit committee? Do I have governance experience? Do I know about sustainability? And that's going to be a big deal to boards. So I think it's sort of thinking through those things, and do not be discouraged. It's a long process. It's a long job once you get it. But it can be difficult to get the first one. And I wouldn't be discouraged at all. It's all goodness in terms of the networking that you do to get there.
Yeah, Lisa, you had
what I was going to say is that this is a perfect transition to clearly what I know the attendees really want to learn more and hear more about, and that is, again, the roadmap and the 3 to 5 year roadmap, or exactly some of the things that Lisa just said. Let's hear from Matt, and then I want to share a quick slide that kind of has a roadmap that we can talk through, because I think we really want folks to walk away with kind of in 3 to 5 years or more, what should they be doing now, kind of in where they are now versus advancing to, how do they advance to the next stage and then become sort of on the radar? So breaking that into kind of 3 steps. Matt, let's start with you. I'm going to go to the slide and then we're going to talk more about this journey to the boardroom.
Great. Well, first of all, Lisa, that was about 4,000 good pieces of advice crammed into 3 minutes there. So I hope everyone was listening and taking notes. Again, the world that Bolster plays in tends to be more of the private company world. So I have a couple of thoughts that I wanted to share on this. One is that the job of being on a private company board is actually pretty different than the job of being on a public company board. There's obviously a lot of things in common, right? You're there to be oversight of the management team and the CEO. But where large and public company boards tend to be much more focused on financials and governance, startup boards and scale-up boards tend to be much more focused on strategy and product and team, and kind of opening doors. Different people will have different experience sets that resonate with different elements of that. But typically when we're talking to clients about what it is that they're looking for when they go to hire a new board member, the baseline is, we want someone who's a great senior executive. Okay, fine. We want someone that knows how to read a P&L. Fine. But then the question really comes down to some combination of 4 different things that everybody has. You just have your own version of them. One is industry experience, right? What industries have you worked in? What industries is that board looking for? The second is functional experience. Is the board looking for a CEO, a CFO, a head of marketing or sales, a head of product? That type of experience to bring to the boardroom. So everyone's got a function, everyone's got an industry. What I would call customer set experience. So is the board representing a company that sells to small businesses? Do they sell to enterprises? Do they sell to consumers? Do they sell to a marketplace? So everyone's worked in businesses and has different experiences with different customer sets. And then finally, stage is always important for private companies. They usually want someone on their board who's been at the next stage up from where they are now, or even a couple stages, or have led organizations through stage changes and transitions. So as you think about sort of preparing your board resume, I'd encourage you to think about those sort of 4 vectors and how you represent yourself. And it doesn't mean you're going to be a fit for every board, but it means when a board is looking for someone like you, they'll have an easier time of finding you. What I would say, just to build on what Lisa said, she had one of the experience sets that we look for when we say that a candidate is board ready, even if they've never been on a board before, which is she'd been in the boardroom a lot. She'd presented to a board of directors and knew what that experience was like. That's a really great stepping stone to your first board seat. But I would say there are two others that we see quite a bit that I think are worth highlighting. One is being on a board of a different kind of organization. So it could be a nonprofit. It could be, as Stephen said, a school board, or even some kind of community board like a PTA or a local Little League or Girl Scouts. Anything that gets you into a boardroom, even if it's a different kind of board, is a marker to a headhunter or to a recruiting CEO that you're serious about what you do and you've had oversight over some organization before. And then finally, I always encourage people to take any advisory role that they can, whether it's a formal one or an informal one. So again, as you're crafting your story, you can say, hey, I've advised CEOs before, and here are some of the ways that I engaged with them. And to the extent that you're interested in tech and sort of the VC ecosystem, the places to go to really focus on advisory type work are going to be the large accelerator programs like Techstars or Y Combinator, which have thousands of mentors and match them up with startups all the time. So look, those are things that, no one of them is going to get you onto a board, but they're all things that help you craft your narrative as someone who's ready to be on a board.
It's excellent. So as we get the slide going, there was a question that came up in terms of what are some of the board readiness programs that are focused on the Black community. I know we work with, there's ELC. We work also with the Black Corporate Directors Conference. I think on the call today, there's also the Black Corporate Board and a new initiative also focused on it. Stephen, do you want to chime in? There's quite a few that we work with and that everyone here on the team work with, but let's have you chime in on that and then we'll go through these slides.
Well, we don't have a lot of time, so why don't we go through the slide? My general response to that, Esther, is that there are lots of organizations. The most important point is that you want to expand your network of people who serve on corporate boards. So you should serve on nonprofits because you believe in that mission. If you want to save the whales, and saving the whales is a good thing, I applaud you. There are 15 different organizations that save the whales. If I were you, I pick the one that's saving the whales and has board members who also serve on a corporate board. Because the way it works is that when it's selected for any board, small board, big board, private or public, they're going to ask that referrer, usually another board member or someone who they know, how does Stephen operate in X environment? And they want to hear how you dealt with issues in which you asked good questions. You did not play manager because you're a board member, not a member of management, but you dug to where you needed to dig and you dealt with situations in which board members deal with. That's type of referral that they want to have. And so there are a lot of different organizations out there. There are too many to name, but those where you're able to get into the network so that you can work with folks and they will be able to refer you and refer you in a way in which they could talk about how you dealt in certain situations where board members may find themselves.
If I could just add real quickly, I mean,
Yes.
I can't agree more, 110% behind what Stephen was saying. And there were a bunch of questions going through the chat about certifications. And, understanding governance without question, the more you know about that, the better. But you can be the most certified person in the world, but if you don't have those connections in the boardroom, it's not going to get you in. And so I can't agree more with Stephen's point, because I know there are people on the call like, oh, I can't be on a board today. That being a public board, go find a cause you're passionate about. Find people on that board who have public company board connections, and that's the way to start building that network out.
That's right.
And to your question, looking at the slide, there's a lot in here to break down. But I see in the early years about board resume and bio. That's a real deep discussion. I just want to say it's different from the bio that you use now to get a job.
That's right.
And it's very, very different because and by the way, you're not going to list that you serve on another corporate board because you don't. That's okay. And you've heard that before. But you're going to talk about things. And actually, it's a really deeper conversation, which we could go into. But without a doubt, it's figuring out, and this is the time that you have now, what's your value proposition? I saw a note in the chat or a question about, I'm X years old, 30 something, between 30 and 40. What's my value? Is there a play for age diversity on boards? And my question sort of ignores my answer ignores what the question is. It goes to, what's your value proposition? It can't be that you're 30. And it can't be, because I can rent that. I could talk to a 20-year-old, a 30-year-old. I can talk to a firm that's going to ask all the 30-year-olds in the country about that. I could talk to a firm that has cybersecurity. I can hire 800 different lawyers. Boards can rent help and advice. There has to be something more. Doesn't mean that advice that you have and that experience isn't part of the value proposition, but it needs to be something more. And that's, as you go through this path in the next 3 to 5 years, it's thinking about exactly what is it? What's my value proposition that if I join a board that I can add? And we got into diversity, and we got that you can read a spreadsheet and things like that. By the way, an audit committee financial expert, as defined by SEC rules, is a very definitive statement. It's a definitive equation, right? And there are a lot of people who don't meet that, and those who do meet it actually have a leg up, because they actually meet the financial expert, audit committee financial expert leg, so they can add that to their resume.
Yeah. So I'm looking at the time here, and just to drive, we've taken some of the prep call, the conversation that we have. Desiree put this together. This is going to be available to all of the attendees, and it starts that roadmap. Right now, if you are in your mid-30s, really focusing on your pathway to the C-suite, getting that industry and functional expertise, just focusing on that, plus your network is a good place. Here you have those key areas that understand the board landscape and what you're doing today. There are most of the board readiness organizations that were listed, and Dana has been doing a great job of announcing some of those. All of them have templates to build your board bio. You don't have to start from scratch. We do that with our Board Ready Institute. You have search here in terms of discovery, engaging, joining board search platforms, which you have here. LinkedIn, making sure you're intentional about your LinkedIn profile and how you position yourself with your functional and industry experience and some of the things you've done. And some of these things have been discussed. We will certainly add some of the items that Lisa brought up as well. When you look at your raising your profile and reputation, and amplifying those experiences, what you bring to the table, advising, as Matt said, advising venture, get governance training, boardroom access, in your current positions, get to a position where you are reporting to the board, as Lisa mentioned. In terms of consideration, again, that network, those referrals, you want to be on people's mind that they are going to refer you to that board and vouch for you. It's not the other way around usually. And continuing, this is just a really great tool once you get down there. And then when you're on the board service, here's some other ideas here. Let's do one last quick 2 words of advice in terms of this this pathway here, the playbook for the boardroom. David, let's start with you. Just 2 words of advice in any of these stages for their journey.
Build your network now.
Lisa.
Oh,
oops, you're on mute.
Muted.
I always tell everyone to treat it like dating. Tell everyone that you're interested, and ask them to look out for you.
Excellent. Stephen.
Think about your value proposition. What makes you unique, and how could the board use you?
Matt.
Be patient.
Excellent. Desiree, congratulations and to everyone who joined. This is just a start, I'm sure, of a great conversation for your journey to the boardroom.
Our panelists, Esther, thank you so much for being here. Everyone, have a wonderful afternoon. We'll follow up with all the resources, and we'll follow up with this session with more. As Stephen said, we got to go deeper.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank
you.
you.
Thank you.
Our
Thanks.
pleasure.